However, a mass vaccination site in Colorado shut down yesterday after a handful of people did suffer side effects from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Yeah, and among them, 2 people were taken to the hospital. They left in an ambulance out of an abundance of caution. Stephanie Whitfield explains what this means as the vaccine continues to be administered across the country.
More than 2,000 people were scheduled to get the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine in Denver yesterday. But health officials shut the site down after 11 people reported symptoms of nausea and dizziness. 2 were taken to the hospital.
We've seen this play out a couple of times through the pandemic.
Dr. Louis Ostrowski is chief of infectious diseases at McGovern Medical School at UT Health. He says health officials in Colorado halted vaccinations just to be extra cautious.
When people start seeing effects, they pause and they assess if this is within what's expected or if there could be a problem with that batch of vaccines or another issue.
Centura Health in Denver says the batch from yesterday is being analyzed at a Colorado state lab. They'll continue administering the J&J vaccine in the meantime. Dr. Ostrowski tells us it's unlikely those side effects will halt vaccinations in other parts of the country. He thinks people here shouldn't be worried about the safety of the shot.
Johnson & Johnson vaccine went through the same rigor of approval that the other vaccines went through. It's a very safe vaccine. It's very effective in preventing deaths and hospitalizations.
He says that's the most important thing to remember because vaccines are the best shot at moving past the pandemic. Stephanie Whitfield, KHOU 11 News.